The courtroom buzzed with the kind of energy you only feel when something monumental is about to happen. Cameras weren't allowed, but that didn't stop the nation's top legal reporters from flying in overnight and jockeying for position in the packed federal gallery. At precisely 9 a.m., the heavy doors swung open. Judge Edward Chen entered like a man auditioning for a role he believed he already owned, his black robes flowing behind him like the curtain before a final act. He didn't acknowledge the crowded room, nor the presence of a former state attorney general standing calmly at the defense table. His focus was on performance, on dominance, and he made that clear the moment he spoke. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his voice crisp with disdain. "I see you're here to represent the defense." Bold. Pam Bondi looked up, composed, unshaken. But what no one in that courtroom knew, not the judge, not the prosecutors, not even the press, was that, within the hour, Judge Edward Chen would no longer be on the bench. He'd be in handcuffs. And it wouldn't be because of the defense's legal arguments. It would be because of what Pam Bondi brought to court that morning, sealed in a manila folder tucked beneath her leather briefcase. A storm that had been building for months and was now ready to break. It was meant to be a standard federal corruption trial. A high-profile one, yes, but nothing out of the ordinary for a courtroom like the Southern District of Florida. On the docket, U.S. versus Klein. The defendant, Richard Klein, was a former procurement officer accused of funneling multi-million-dollar contracts to Gulfstream Industries in exchange for bribes. The evidence? Circumstantial. The prosecution? Confident. And the presiding judge? Notorious. Edward Chen was no ordinary federal judge. He was known throughout the 11th Circuit for his sharp intellect and sharper tongue. He had a reputation for pushing attorneys to their limits and for pushing female litigators over the edge. The press called him the Iron Gavel. His clerks, privately, called him Emperor Chen. Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, wasn't intimidated by the nickname or the man. For weeks, her name had dominated legal headlines after unexpectedly announcing she would serve as lead defense counsel. Insiders whispered that she had a personal score to settle. Others suggested she was simply after the spotlight. But neither theory was quite right. Bondi had taken the case because something didn't sit right. Gulfstream Industries, the same company at the heart of the prosecution's narrative, had quietly benefited from multiple judicial rulings in the last year, rulings signed by one man, Edward Chen. And that wasn't the only anomaly. Months earlier, Bondi's team began compiling a pattern. Anomalies in Chen's rulings, procedural irregularities, and sealed financial records showing troubling coincidences between his courtroom decisions and private market shifts. At first, she tried the proper channels. Twice, she filed requests for judicial review. Both were mysteriously rejected without explanation. So she did what she had always done. She prepared in silence. She watched. She documented. She built a legal dossier so ironclad that by the time trial day arrived, she was no longer just defending a client. She was walking into that courtroom prepared to expose a sitting federal judge. But she didn't show her hand. Not yet. As the gallery filled that morning, Judge Chen didn't just take the bench. He took control. His opening remarks were less about procedure and more about posture. He made subtle digs about Bondi's record, her experience, even her accent. Lines laced with condescension that drew smirks from the prosecution table and tight-lipped reactions from jurors. Bondi took it all in. She stood with quiet poise, taking notes in the same pale, yellow legal pad she'd carried since law school. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply waited. And when the moment came, she would flip to a new page and rewrite the narrative that Judge Chen had been crafting for years. Because Pam Bondi hadn't come to court to win a motion. She had come to court to bring down a judge. The opening statements should have been routine. Pam Bondi, now standing before the court, began with her signature calm, a firm voice, measured cadence, and a clear, cogent summary of the defense's position. It was less theater, more substance. She addressed the jury, not the judge, with professional clarity. But Judge Chen wasn't interested in substance. "Miss Bondi," he interrupted, not 2 minutes into her address, "are you aware that opening statements are not opportunities to posture for the press?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Bondi blinked once. She didn't look rattled. She simply turned a page in her legal pad and said, "Your Honor, I am addressing the jury with the facts they are entitled to hear." Chen leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Just ensure that what you present today actually qualifies as legal fact." The tone was venomous. The message was clear. He didn't respect her, and he wanted the courtroom to know it. From the jury box, one man narrowed his eyes. Chen continued the performance. Over the next 30 minutes, he sustained nearly every prosecution objection and dismissed the defenses with a casual wave. Bondi would cite precedent. Chen would cut her off with a smirk and say, "We'll move on." Even seasoned court reporters, accustomed to sharp exchanges and abrasive judges, began to shift uncomfortably. This wasn't just judicial firmness. This was targeted antagonism. Bondi remained stoic. She continued her presentation, weaving together a web of inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline, exposing their over-reliance on hearsay, and highlighting the lack of physical evidence. Each time she gained traction, Chen would cut in. "Are we going to hear more speculative fiction, Miss Bondi? Or is there a point to this tangent?" The smirks at the prosecution table widened. Bondi didn't bite. She paused, smiled faintly, and responded, "My next point, Your Honor, concerns direct contradictions in the witness statements provided by Mr. Harrington." At the mention of Maxwell Harrington, CEO of Gulfstream Industries, Judge Chen's face shifted, just slightly, but Bondi noticed. She glanced at her co-counsel, who silently slid a sealed manila folder onto the table. "Your Honor," Bondi said, her tone still neutral, "I'd like to submit this sealed evidentiary packet to the court. Its contents concern procedural conduct relevant to this trial." Chen raised a brow. "Is this your attempt to distract from your crumbling defense?" Bondi's jaw tightened. "It is a matter of judicial integrity." She handed the envelope to the clerk. The judge didn't open it immediately. Instead, he tapped his pen against the bench, staring at her with thinly veiled contempt. "We'll review your material later. Continue." But it was too late. The room felt different now. Something had shifted. Pam Bondi returned to her argument, but eyes weren't just on her anymore. They were watching the envelope, watching Judge Chen. 10 minutes later, she made her move. "Your Honor, I'd like to bring to the court's attention a critical conflict of interest." Chen leaned back. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the presiding judge has had undisclosed contact with the primary beneficiary of a guilty verdict in this case." The courtroom fell into a frozen silence. "Excuse me?" Chen's voice was a low growl. "We have documented meetings, 7 in total, between Your Honor and Mr. Maxwell Harrington, all within 72 hours of key procedural decisions regarding this case." Gasps echoed across the room. From the back of the courtroom, a woman in a charcoal gray blazer, previously unnoticed, removed her sunglasses and adjusted her DOJ badge. Chen's lips parted, then closed. He reached for his gavel. "This court will recess for—" "Not yet," Bondi said, interrupting him for the first time that day. She lifted a second file. This contains a sworn affidavit, audio transcripts, and banking records, all linking Your Honor to financial deposits made through offshore intermediaries connected to Gulf Stream Industries. A reporter in the gallery audibly whispered, "Holy," Chen stood. "Enough, bailiff, clear the courtroom." But before the order could be executed, the woman in the gray blazer stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said, voice firm. "I'm Deputy Director Lauren Vasquez, Department of Justice. You are to remain seated." Gasps turned to dead silence. Everyone waited. Chen remained standing, but his face had gone pale. Judge Edward Chen did not sit. His knuckles whitened on the gavel as his gaze swept across the courtroom, which had now transformed from a forum of law into a theater of shock. Reporters typed furiously. The jury sat frozen. Prosecutors exchanged bewildered glances. Pam Bondi, for her part, was the calmest person in the room. "Ms. Bondi," Chen began, forcing control back into his voice. "The accusations you're making are fully documented," she interjected. "Every claim, every allegation, backed by admissible evidence and witness testimony." He stared at her. For the first time, truly stared, not as a judge regarding counsel, but as a man suddenly aware that he was being cornered. "You had every opportunity to address these issues through the proper channels," he said. Bondi nodded. "We did. 3 times. Our motions disappeared from the docket. Our filings were lost." Chen's lips tightened. A bead of sweat glistened at his temple. Deputy Director Vasquez took another step forward. "Judge Chen," she said evenly, "the Department of Justice is aware of the evidence Ms. Bondi refers to. Our agents have authenticated financial records, verified surveillance logs, and conducted forensic voice analysis of audio recordings." The judge finally lowered himself into his seat. Vasquez continued, "You are the subject of an active federal investigation into judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, and financial conspiracy. As of this moment, you are ordered not to leave this courtroom." The gallery was dead silent. Pam Bondi stepped back, giving the moment its weight. Her legal team sat still, watching. The prosecution looked as if the floor had shifted beneath their feet. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "we formally request your recusal from these proceedings under 28 U.S. Code Section 455. Chen didn't respond. His hands, moments earlier wielding a gavel with theatrical authority, now trembled. Vasquez nodded toward the rear of the courtroom. A pair of U.S. Marshals moved silently into place. The prosecutor, James Moretti, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, the government had no prior knowledge of these allegations. We respectfully request a suspension of proceedings while we consult with DOJ representatives." Chen, glassy-eyed, didn't object. Vasquez addressed the courtroom. "As per emergency order from the Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, these proceedings are hereby suspended. All evidence entered today is to remain secured by court custody under direct supervision of federal agents." The bailiff stood motionless, unsure whether to shout the traditional, "All rise." Everyone was already on edge. Pam Bondi quietly collected the exhibits. She nodded to her associate, who wheeled a locked cart back toward the defense table. Chen tried to speak. "This is unprecedented. Improper." Vasquez cut him off. "Improper is using your position to suppress exculpatory evidence and profit from the verdicts you manipulate. Improper is laundering judicial influence through corporate back channels. You don't get to invoke judicial decorum now, Judge." Her words hit like iron. Chen slumped back, silent. The marshal stepped forward. "Edward Chen," one of them said, "you are under investigation for multiple federal offenses. You are not under arrest at this moment, but you are being detained for questioning under federal authority. Please come with us." He didn't argue. He rose slowly, looking down at the bench he'd ruled from for over 2 decades. Bondi met his eyes. There was no triumph in hers, only resolve. As he stepped away, reporters sprang for the exits. Phones buzzed. The story was out. The iron gavel had fallen, and it wasn't in his hand. In the corner, one juror, an older woman who hadn't spoken all day, let out a whisper almost no one heard. "Justice," she said. And then Judge Edward Chen, once untouchable, was led out of his own courtroom by the same justice system he thought he controlled. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was chaos. News of the suspension hit the media like a lightning bolt. Reporters swarmed the corridor. Camera crews blocked exits, and courthouse staff scrambled to maintain order. A perimeter had already been set up by courthouse security. Federal agents moved with quiet efficiency. Inside, the courtroom remained in stunned silence. The jurors were dismissed with careful instruction, but none of them moved immediately. They watched as the once powerful judge now stood under scrutiny. Pam Bondi remained seated, arms crossed, face unreadable. Deputy Director Vasquez conferred briefly with her team. The DOJ wasn't done, not by a long shot. Her next move was calculated, deliberate. She stepped forward again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, raising her voice slightly, "by order of the Chief Judge, and in accordance with the RICO Act, we are placing Judge Edward Chen under arrest for judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, bribery, and racketeering." Gasps, audible ones. The 2 U.S. Marshals didn't hesitate. They approached Judge Chen. "You need to place your hands in front of you, Your Honor," one of them said, almost gently. Chen didn't speak. He extended his arms. The handcuffs clicked. It was the kind of moment that doesn't just change a courtroom. It changes the reputation of a legal system. One moment, Chen had ruled with mockery and derision. The next, he was just another man with wrists bound in steel. The gallery erupted in a storm of movement, pens scribbling, reporters sprinting, phones ringing with editors on the other end, screaming for confirmation. Pam Bondi stood quietly. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply nodded to her team, her eyes scanning the chaos as if she had expected all of it, because she had. The courthouse steps resembled a press briefing zone by the time Bondi emerged. News vans flanked the curb. Satellite dishes pierced the skyline. Flashes fired as soon as the doors opened. Bondi walked slowly. Her legal team flanked her, but all cameras were trained on her. Someone shouted, "Ms. Bondi, did you know the arrest would happen today?" She paused. "I knew the truth would catch up to him eventually," she said. "Whether that was today, tomorrow, or a year from now, what matters is that justice is finally being served." Inside the courthouse, federal agents began securing the judge's chambers. Evidence boxes, monitors, and external drives were logged and tagged. Everything was under review. A second investigation, this time into previous cases Judge Chen had presided over, was already underway. Meanwhile, the man at the center of the storm sat in the back of a black SUV, wrists cuffed, his reputation obliterated. Judge Edward Chen had entered court that morning a figure of fear and power. By afternoon, he had become a cautionary tale. Back in the courtroom, Bondi's co-counsel sealed the last of the evidence packages. The judge's chair sat empty. No verdict had been reached in the case of U.S. versus Klein, but another verdict had been rendered, a more resounding one, echoing far beyond a single trial. Power, unchecked, had met accountability. And in the end, it wasn't the gavel that brought justice. It was the truth. And Pam Bondi delivered it, one page, one folder, one fact at a time.